the Soyuz was definitely the most uncomfortable. And it was that Soyuz to the other capsule, because it was part of the like the observation capsule in the Soyuz, uh, with the space suit on. That was like the first thing we shot, so it was good training. So me, Mino, and Hyo-jin, we had that took like 2.5 months or something to shoot all of that type of stuff, just us three.
Man.
And then by the time we got to the space station, we were like experts in uncomfortableness.
It was all downhill after that, right? It's just
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It's funny because all of the other three were doing all of the mistakes that we were doing, and the director was getting just like, "Jack, again."
Welcome to the Asylum. I'd like to welcome Alex Hafner to Comix Asylum. Alex, how has your 2025 been so far?
It's been very good. Very excited for what the year has to bring. I mean, I just had this show come out, and then now I'm doing a lot of press for it, and so I'm grateful that you're giving me the time of day to talk about the show and talk about everything else. So yeah, I'm excited.
No, it's a pleasure to have you here. Had a chance to take a little bit of a look at When the Stars Gossip. What can you tell us about the show?
Well, it's a space drama. It's about a tourist that goes on a secret mission to do like an in vitro, it's not a spoiler, to do an in vitro fertilization for his potential future father-in-law's dead son. Um, because he's now lost the lineage, uh, the family lineage, the father, the patriarch, anyway.
Right.
And then everything, of course, doesn't go as planned because otherwise there would be no drama. and um, and yeah, and within that context, I play an astronaut because there's six of us on the space station, but I'm essentially the captain of the rockets, the Soyuz rockets, like it's essentially like a professional pilot or bus driver to the space station. And and oddly, uh, that's in a way the premise of the show is based off of something that happens to my character who has like a sperm defect. And it turned out that there was an astronaut that had discovered that his sperm behaved differently in microgravity. Like this happened in the 80s. And
Right.
they kind of kind of decided to base this show a mix off of that. And that in Korea, I think they have the lowest birth rate in the world. So it's,
Right.
I guess, people are worried. Uh,
Hmm.
with the aging population and all that kind of stuff. And
So it's a
yeah, then you
it,
got this show.
so it's got some pretty relevant I guess themes and topics, as well as space tourism, which you kind of think of some of the stars. I think William Shatner went up on one, and I think Katy Perry's going up on another, I guess, where they're
Yeah,
just going to skirt the atmosphere.
right.
So it's pretty topical, and I guess 30 years ago, 40
Hmm.
years ago, it seemed like civilians going up into space for this kind of a thing seemed kind of foreign. But it's pretty much on our doorstep, where you could see in another 20, 30 years, it's kind of like the Concorde, but
Yeah.
in space.
Yeah, I think in a way it'll help them. It'll be because everything in space is extremely expensive, even just to get stuff up there. So it'll be a way maybe to subsidize, I guess, um, certain inventions. A lot of inventions, I wasn't privy to it before shooting the show because I wasn't that into space stuff. But because of this, you research and you learn,
Mhm.
and it's like, wow, a lot of inventions happen because of what space programs have been able to provide for research. And yeah, it's very interesting. So,
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because like you think of, like, I like F1. I love
mhm,
car racing. And you think of all the innovations that come out of some of those kind of endeavors. So paddle
mhm,
shifts versus a gear shift for manual, right? That came out of
right,
F1. And so when you have that kind of money, um, being put into something, it eventually then gets filtered down for regular people. And were there any inventions that you discovered that came out of space travel that were like, oh, that's interesting?
A lot of the like drying, like vacuum technology.
Oh,
I
right.
think Dyson. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure. They got like some of the stuff comes from things that they discovered in space, and then you learn about like different countries' sort of innovations to the space station. So I thought it was
Right.
quite funny or quite endearing that um, the Italian Space Agency they were able to develop an espresso machine that works in
That's
space.
amazing.
So it's
That's
Lavazza, the the like coffee brand.
mm-hmm.
They created the like technology, the espresso machine for space. Which was kind of funny because they weren't like, I mean, I'd known what that brand was, but then now I have a different opinion of it because of that. So it's like, oh yeah, these guys are amazing. But yeah, and then what else? I'm blanking out on some of the other stuff, but a lot of like things with plants and like seeds and yeah, they've done a lot of like plant things grow differently, with when you don't have gravity. So for certain, like I know all the astronauts, they have to do 2, 3 hours of exercise a day just so that they don't lose muscle tone, or like even if we're not moving, the fact that there's gravity, the fact that you stand up, it's what do you call it? It's a force on your body, and
Like
that you
weight
no
bearing
longer
almost.
have
Yeah.
when you're in space. So yeah, a lot of people have like bone density problems afterwards if they spend too much time there. Um, but yeah, that kind of stuff. And then the space, because we had an astronaut on set come a few times, like to answer questions and to kind of check to make sure that we weren't doing anything that was like too unrealistic. Obviously, it's impossible to be 100% real in gravity, even with like, I mean, they were pretty obsessed. We would shoot pretty slow, but one of the big things about traveling to space was that it's extremely uncomfortable. Like the pressure and the sensation is like you feel like you always want to vomit, and because it's such a special and unique experience, you like internalize it, you rationalize it, and but it's not something that's like um, sustainable really for a long period of time. And then all the astronauts, which connected with my original opinion of why are we so worried about space, the planet and all that type of stuff, is the when you go out there and then you see the Earth, like you actually see it and you're so far away. I guess it's extremely humbling, and it kind of makes you appreciate what you have, what you've always had. Um, and that's kind of also poetic with what the theme and message of this show is. So yeah.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned the vomiting thing because I wouldn't have thought about that. Of course, the G's would play a role, and that actually comes up in the pilot episode.
Yeah. Yeah,
Having
but I
to
mean, it's like
hold it
it's like
back.
when Soyeon, so the Yi Soyeon was the astronaut. She's the only Korean astronaut to have been in space,
Uh-huh.
um, and she was always saying that it was the feeling was like in the when you're just coming down in the beginning of a roller coaster. That first sort
Mm.
of like
Where your stomach kind of feels
yeah,
like it wants
kind
to.
of that sensation all the time.
Wow.
And when you're in space. But you're floating around, which is extremely cool. So it's kind of like this sort of mixed feelings, I imagine. But that worked out well because the harnesses and all this type of stuff was really torturous. It's like after 6, 7, 8 hours, some days we'd shoot, 15, 16, 20 hours on like
Mm.
special days. And your body would be aching. So you're like, okay, well, it's not that out of line that I'm cranky because I would naturally feel uncomfortable. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Totally. So speaking of that, right? Because I know, as we mentioned before we started, I'm currently working on a film, so I know how long the days can be.
Mhm.
What kind of preparation did you do or have to go through for your role? Was there any, not only just like learning stuff and amassing knowledge on how it is to be an astronaut, But
Mhm.
was there any physical training that you had to do to kind of get ready for the role?
We had some like wire training and harness. There's two ways that they'd set us up to hang essentially. So we'd either be wearing a vest, which is really fast and easy, but the vest is extremely tiring. So it's very hard to act with like a vest on and you're hanging. Like those are okay
Correct.
if you're gonna just move. And then there was this sort of waist harness with like a circular thing on it, and you could rotate on it. And that actually felt kind of cool because if you pushed off something, then it would feel like you'd be in space or whatever. Um, and yeah, just getting used to that really. And like retraining your movement in the sense that, like for me, for example, I'm very erratic with certain motions. So I had to retrain to, you know, if I'm gonna stand up, it's everything. Like the trick is to do it all with your hands, like if you're gonna stand or you're gonna move, you do it with your hands. If I'm gonna reach for
Mm.
something, I want to go there, it's first with my hand, and then that sort of
That's right, because you wouldn't have any gravity to push off of, right? So you'd have to
you have to
like
mimic.
you have to mimic
You have
that
to
you're
mimic, and
moving
it
that way.
and it was
Yeah.
hard because certain scenes, if the stakes are there, it's emotional. Like when I'm emotional, I get jittery. So
Right.
that's okay if I'm holding on to like the if I'm holding on to some bar on the in the space station or wherever, then it's okay. Then I can be jittery as long as I'm holding on. But if I'm not, then I had to be very mindful. And that was essentially um especially because it all happened so fast. So I spent the first month, I like between the time I was called that I booked the role and I moved to Korea was about a week, and then another week and a half of some like, trying on things and like some basic so this training with the wire, how to move around, how to deal with all the chrome guys, all these chroma men. There was like maybe five or six per person, just to be used to them, like just touching you and moving you and being okay with it, Um, because sometimes, they wouldn't do it on purpose, but sometimes they grab you in some place like maybe you're ticklish, and
Right,
just to
right.
help you move. And so like this sort of desensitize, it's a very, very what do you call it? Very contradictory in the sense that you had to
Right.
be very present, but at the same time, like, oh, it's okay, I'm totally just desensitized of whatever motion, touching, you're grabbing to just help me move along. Because sometimes we would be hanging on these sort of like what do you call them? These like lines. So
Yeah.
each of us had like a track on the
Hmm.
in the space station. So if I had to go from one end to the other, kind of traverse, you needed the chroma guys to help you kind of push, because otherwise there would be no way you could reach the other side. So you'd have to like kind of do this motion, and then they would help you. But sometimes, your body is also at certain areas is soft. So sometimes,
Yeah.
they're trying to move you there, but you're trying to not, be jittery. So it's kind of this, yeah.
Maintain body pose integrity sort of thing. Right.
And then the other thing that we learned was, or all of the actors learned, is because it gets very tiring, all of the, harnesses and all that type of stuff. We all learned that when it was a close up, we would, after about 2 months, we were all able to act uh, kind of mimicking this sort of, here, I'll do it right here, this sort of like space motion. You're kind of just holding on someplace, and then we're doing the scene, but we're kind of just like
Bobbing.
just sort of bobbing in the air,
Right.
but still being able to maintain like a, heated discussion. And yeah, we all learned that pretty quick. Like, because the harness was crazy, or the harness, was very tiring. So then when we weren't doing it right, it was funny because at first it'd be like, okay, we've had enough of this. We're gonna put the harnesses on. No, no, just give me one more take. I'll get it right. I'll get it right.
Because you're like, no harness. If I can do this without the
Yeah, no
harness, I'm
harness.
good.
If I can avoid the harness, like the long shot harness, okay. But then the close-ups was like a rest.
Right, right. And then there's the setup because you got to get it on and then change your wardrobe a little bit to
Oh yeah,
match
yeah, yeah.
it. It's
Yeah,
just
it was slow.
slows production. I can see why now you said that production could be a bit slow because you have
It
all of
was,
these things to account for.
yeah, I mean, it was supposed to be 6 months, and then it was uh, a year. It was double.
Yeah.
And they had to rewrite. They rewrote a lot of stuff to cut because space wise we weren't going to meet the target or whatever the constraints really.
Yeah.
They only have
Yeah.
so much money.
Exactly. I totally understand.
Yeah, so they like, yeah, which is unfortunate because it would have been cool to do more space stuff. I like the space scenes the most. Maybe that's because I'm in them. But the space
uh
stuff was cool. And yeah, that was totally, plus it really felt because it was so sort of isolating, you kind of felt that in the sort of set, you know.
right. The space station set
Yeah, because we had it on different sound stages. Each one was kind of this module.
of a
And
different section of the space station.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then they were big. It was big. It was 50% larger than the real
Wow.
thing. So that the
Yeah.
camera, so it's
Yeah.
so the camera with the because they sometimes they'd set up the camera with a crane, and
Hmm.
they'd set it be able for it to go inside, and then they still
Yes.
wanted to like on top of the modules. It was like they had this sort of mini platform for like the boom
The
operator.
boom operator
They
and
were
everybody.
like
Yeah.
up there, but because they were up there, you never felt like nobody was ever really in your line. The only thing in your line of vision were the other actors, and then some of the lighting. They move. It was totally modular. Like those
Hmm.
modular like furniture that you can
Yes.
kind of put in and take out a piece, and they would just take out a piece, throw in some sort of green, some chroma stuff
Yep.
to like wherever they took it out because they would put in some lights there usually to light you
Oh,
up. To,
very cool. Very cool. And now you said floating on the or floating on the space station is one thing, but
Mhm.
then what about the capsule scenes when you're taking off in the rocket and you're in the big bulky spacesuit in that tight quarter? How is that?
Yeah, that was tough. Because those seats weren't very comfortable, uh, and it was very hot, and
Oh,
that suit
yeah.
was so hot. Like it didn't matter what they could have the air on blast in the soundstage, but you'd be in there and you're like, and especially the times that they'd have us
Oh,
close the like
the
the top
visor.
lid or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah.
It's almost
That
like
was
some
tough. But
PTSD
they
you're
made
going
they
through.
they really made the thing shake. So the shaking is
Oh,
real.
okay.
Um,
So was it like on a some sort of a like a structure or a platform where they could shake it themselves, or was it more mechanized?
no, they had it like they put this sort of hydraulic unit
Hmm.
in it
Okay.
somehow. They were all of the stuff, like all of they were built on these blocks, and those blocks were on wheels, and they could just wheel them
Okay.
to wherever. And then somehow in in that one, the Soyuz rocket, I think for certain scenes, they would like use I don't know if it's a forklift or something, and they would put it on these sort of hydraulic things, and it would just shake. It would shake like crazy, which is nice.
Very cool.
Because the
Very
real
cool.
thing shakes, and so you didn't really have to act too much of the shaking. Maybe something,
Right.
put your head back. But yeah, but they were definitely uncomfortable seats. And then sometimes when you had the hardest part in that was the mimicking the microgravity. So they would
Hmm.
they would they would also tilt it. They would set it in a certain angle so it'd be easier for you to kind of either if you were laying down, if we were taking off, they would have it so that we were totally laying down. And then sometimes they would kind of have it up one. And then so you'd be essentially almost standing up. You kind of actually needed the belt to not fall over.
Right.
And yeah, that kind of stuff. But that was the Soyuz was definitely the most uncomfortable. And it was that Soyuz to the other capsule because it was part of the like the observation capsule in the Soyuz. Uh, with the space suit on, that was like the first thing we shot. So it was good training. So me, Mino, and Hyo-jin, that took like 2.5 months or something to shoot all of that type of stuff, just us three.
Man.
And and then by the time we got to the space station, we were like experts in uncomfortableness.
It was all downhill after that, right? It's
Yeah,
just like,
yeah.
yeah.
It's funny because all of the other three were doing all of the mistakes that we were doing, and the director was getting just like, "Jack, again, again." Um,
I could imagine too, because like, how do you hit your mark hanging like that? Like it
um,
must have been kind of challenging. Like, what was
yeah.
rehearsal like? Because you've got all these basically bogeys
Mhm.
flying by all over the place. That must have been a bit of a challenge. And then you got to stay in character, remember your lines,
Yeah,
all that kind of stuff.
that was tough because before this shoot, I didn't, I hadn't considered that that was going to be that big of an issue. So usually, like there's stuff I personally, I as an actor, like to discover when
Mm,
I read it with the other people. So when you're doing a like a blocking rehearsal, or you're shooting,
yeah,
or you're even shooting
yeah,
the wide shot, which is like usually
hmm,
the first shot you shoot.
yeah.
And
You get your
the wide
master.
shot, you don't have to do anything crazy because it's establishing usually. And then you can kind of discover certain things and be like, oh, you're gonna take that way? Okay. Let's go through that. And then the close-ups. And then in this case, it was almost backwards. We would shoot essentially the close-ups first because the wide shot was more complicated. And yeah, so it was tough to kind of have decided what, what my performance was going to be before. And then the other actors would change the lines. So I had to like I would rehearse things with I had an assistant translator.
Right.
Everything was, I mean, when I come in, we speak in English, but then I have to know when to interrupt. And sometimes the other actor switch the lines naturally, but that was tough tough for me.
Right.
It's
Right.
like, oh man, I remembered this. So I'd kind of just go for these sort of cues. Like there's certain verbs that I would try to remember.
Right.
Um, and then yeah, a lot of lost in translation moments, especially especially in the beginning. I definitely felt like, Centauri whiskey commercial for, but as an egocentrical actor that I was, I thought that was like my fault, all of this somehow.
Right.
Then I did discover with time, no, they had a lot of problems with the lighting. And I was like, oh,
Mm,
that would have been nice to know. Here I thought that they were mad at me that I wasn't, that I wasn't hitting the mark on time and all this type of stuff. But
yeah.
typically the process would be we would rehearse with the stunt people.
Got it.
So because that was the stunt team essentially, all of the chroma guys, and
Hmm.
then we would kind of we would give our ideas and kind of rehearse the movement maybe, and they would try to come up with it while the camera would set up, and then we'd come back. Um, yeah, so before like in the beginning of the day, like during so if it was like a big scene, let's say your typical days, you get in, you do all the makeup and all this type of stuff, and then you go uh you go shoot or you do a rehearsal and then you shoot it and all that type of stuff. So what we do in important days like this is before doing the makeup or before I would do my makeup and hair and all this type of stuff, I'd get there, we'd have sort of this meeting of this is the scene, and then the other actors in the scene, we would put in our input on what we thought. And then that
Right.
way they would try to come up with some sort of movement. Um, and it's a mix of what we proposed and what they could do. So then by the time you just have to accept that, maybe we get there and the movement is going to be this one. So you figure it out.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
yeah.
And then also too, because you'd mentioned that because you're almost doing it backwards,
Mhm.
how does that affect your acting process when you're locked into something and then you're like, oh, I really would have loved to have changed it to build up to that end point. Does that ever get figured out as you're into day 20 and day 25 of shooting, or is it a constant kind of like back and forth and
Um,
an adaptation?
yeah, it would evolve. And then at first it was much more rigid. And then as we got better and we got more fluid, there would be days where towards the middle where we would reshoot certain things,
Yes.
and but then at the end we kind of everybody knew their like you know, it's kind of this mix of discovering on one end you have your character, and I think Mino and Hyo-jin, the two leads of the show, they were with the project or with the script much longer than I was. I was still kind of
Mhm.
discovering because I didn't have all of the episodes by the time I got
Right.
there, especially they were rewriting them. So it's like, oh man,
Right.
so how does this end? How does this end for me?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, you kind of just by the, you know, halfway by the time we got halfway through shooting, I feel like everybody was so kind of dialed into the flow that this type of stuff, you know, we would kind of figure it out, or we would work on certain scenes a few days in advance and kind of
Mhm.
just rehearse them um, on our off time because there was a lot of like the way Koreans shoot, you spend a lot of time on set, so you're there waiting around a lot. And so we would just go to we would visit each other's trailers sometimes, especially some of the other actors with the English. You know, they were very worried about how it sounded, and I was excited. I was like, "Hey, man, I'll be your English coach. You come,
Right.
we can rehearse it. It's gonna be a win-win for everybody." You know, and yeah, yeah, so with time, you know, it's like at the beginning of this set, at the beginning of the show, you're kind of, you know, a little bit insecure about, you know, it's a new thing and
Yeah.
and and yeah, and things go wrong more often in the beginning than in the end when everybody has the flow, you know. So yeah, the beginning was definitely much more stressful in a way for the show. All of the Soyuz stuff was stressful, so it was okay. You know,
It
it wasn't
works.
like we weren't shooting the end of the show, luckily, at the beginning of the
Yeah.
show. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes you're shooting the end in the beginning, and
Yes.
you're like, okay. All of the growing pains should not be here. um,
And so I just want to get this clear because you were shooting both in Korean and English. Was it almost that you do each scene twice or once in English and once in Korean? Like how did that work?
No, they're shooting in Korean
Okay.
until my character uh, comes into the scene. Or if
Right.
they're speaking, I think there's a couple other characters occasionally from like different space programs that they like
Right.
talk with. But that's not so much the astronauts. That would be more the people in sort of the NASA equivalent, uh, the Korean Space Agency NASA equivalent. And
Right. Right.
um, but yeah, they would be in Korean, and then my character comes in into the scene, or they would need something from my character, and then they start speaking in English,
Right. Right. And
then
then they
go
just take
back to
care of the
Korean.
rest of it.
Yeah, and
Take
they
care
go
of the
back.
rest of it in dub and whatever.
No, they don't dub. Like it's if you watch the original language format,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm speaking, I have Korean subtitles. Below.
No,
It's
no, I mean for the rest of the show when the other actors
the other act.
because I was watching it today and it was I guess it was just straight English what I was watching. I'm not
Oh,
sure if
that's
it's because I'm
completely
here in
dubbed.
Canada, so I
Th-
think it
That's
was
com-
dubbed.
that's completely dubbed, and then they even dub me. I'm
So
dubbed in
I
that.
would see. I wanted to ask you that. I wanted to
Yeah,
ask you that
I
because I'm
saw
like,
that and I was like,
is
what?
that you? Is
No,
that Alex's
you
voice?
have
I
to
wasn't
watch
quite
it
sure.
in original. I mean, it's easier for them. Uh, like I understand why they do it because it's
Oh yeah.
easier for Netflix to just dub everybody because otherwise it's like, oh, from this moment to this moment, and then some of the stuff I say is in Spanish, so it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's hard for them.
An editing nightmare as well too, right?
Probably, yeah. So they just
Yeah.
dub everything. I think there's some lost in that because there's certain things I say to myself in Spanish that they don't understand, obviously,
Right.
or
Right.
certain reactions. And then this stuff that they say in Korean that they don't want necessarily my character to know, you know? So that I feel like is lost a little bit, but it's probably easier to follow. You know, you have to be really like with the Korean, unless you know Korean, you have to really
Yes.
be like attentive. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I was surprised because that's one of the first things I checked. I was like, I wonder if stuff that I have in English and in Spanish is is dubbed, and it was.
Right. Right. And like you're multilingual.
Mhm,
I think you speak four languages.
mhm.
How much Korean did you pick up?
When I was there, I picked up a little bit, like I was doing Duolingo and stuff. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was very hard to sign up at I would have liked to sign up at an academy, but I was
Right.
living a little bit too far from the center of Seoul because the production was like far away. And then the shooting days and shooting hours was always changing. Like I would think I have like 3 days off, and they'd be like, no, 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 you can't go anywhere because the new schedule is coming out today, and you might shoot tomorrow. And you're like, okay. And it was like
Yeah.
this all of the time. And so it was very hard to sign up anywhere because everybody, especially Korean culture, they kind of want to have certain things like fixed, you know? It's like reminded me of like my German uncles. They're like, wait,
Right.
like you're coming, in September, but are you coming? You're coming on Friday. So how about this Saturday? I was like, yo, man, I don't even know. Uh, so it was kind of
Yeah.
like it was very hard. And then I had a translator, so which is nice, but it also makes you lazy. And
Mm,
and yeah, so I've been learning Korean ever since finished the show. I've been learning Korean, and
nice.
now it would have been
Nice.
nice to go to Korea now to shoot it.
Got it.
Having because I would have enjoyed the experience much more. But I felt like there's certain things that you pick up, especially set lingo. Like I understood
Yes.
set lingo, you know, because it's the same. You hear the same things repeated all the time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And what was it like going, because you've kind of shot everywhere, going
Mhm.
from like a European set to a North American set to a Korean set? What are like some of the similarities and differences?
Okay. I think the biggest difference, I mean, the sets themselves, they're all the same,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
camera department, you could just look and you essentially know.
Yeah.
Um, the biggest difference is like the way they do logistics, I think.
Okay. Okay. I can get
And
that.
like all of the way people move, like in Korea, they had the crew just on one bus or two buses. They would come because it was far,
Wow.
like the set was far out. So it just had these huge sort of looking tour bus, and the crew would go there. And if they had long days, they would the sound, the what is it, the studios, they had like a hotel. So the
Hmm.
crew would stay at the hotel, or I could stay at the hotel. But I lived like 45 minutes away, so I'd always just go home. But that I think, and then the actors in Korea, they all have their own sort of makeup and styling team. So they show up,
Really?
yeah. We
Wow.
have a couple like on set hair and makeup people, which was essentially, I feel like they did that because of me, because I
Right.
don't have my own team. But
Hmm.
everybody else, they had all of the main, like all of the other leads, they had, you know, stylist, assistant hairstylist, makeup person, wardrobe stylist. I was like, wardrobe stylist? What do you mean wardrobe stylist? Set costume.
This
But
is
it's
this is
like,
this is all new to me.
yeah, but
This
it's
is
it's
all new
it's
to me.
it's all of the clothes were kind of they would refit them so that the they were just like Mino
Perfect.
had all of his stuff like it almost was like tailored to him
Right.
way. And that doesn't always happen with a
Yeah.
jumpsuit, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, so that was very different because they would come in these sort of caravans. They're like this literal entourage of teams of like, 3, 4 cars per actor.
Hmm. Interesting.
So that's the biggest difference. And then the set, like the shooting hours is definitely different. Like in Korea, they shoot maybe less days, uh,
Okay.
but when they shoot, it's like intense, you know.
Hmm.
Um, like the longest day I had maybe was like 36 hours, and it was a special day because we had double unit. Like
Wow.
that would never happen in the
No. No.
US.
What's your turnaround after that?
Oh yeah, and that was tough sometimes. Turnaround was tough because sometimes I'd get like dropped off at, you know, 2 in the morning, and then they'd be like, "Okay, you're getting picked up at 9:30." You're like, "What?
Whoa.
9:30? Like I can't
Wow.
even like sleep well. I need to look okay." You know?
So that makes sense why they have their own personal makeup teams then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like, and then the traffic in Seoul is really bad. So
Okay.
uh some of these the actor cars. I call them actor cars, but essentially it's like the Korean version of the Mercedes van. You know the
Right. I know those.
Hyo?
Yep.
The Korean version is this Kia Carnival, which is
Okay.
like super decked out, and they have a bed. Some of them have a bed,
Nice.
like a hospital bed, uh,
Nice. Okay.
or like one of these, business class sort of lazy boy type seat that goes completely flat. And you get in there, and you're like, okay, I understand. This makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely the biggest difference. But on the flip side, one nice thing is when you had, if you had 2 or 3 days like that, then you wouldn't shoot the rest of the week. There was
Got
like
it.
a mix of, like so people wouldn't go crazy.
Yeah, you got to recover.
But yeah, the crews work crazy, and then the director worked. The man wouldn't sleep. Like because he would shoot the space unit, and then there was a land unit, and then
Hmm.
um, he would shoot both. And then there came a moment where he couldn't do both anymore, and they had to like get another director to do the land.
Second unit or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, that type of stuff. But
Man,
I would not. Yeah, it's
that
like
reminds me of,
hard.
yeah, that's a hard ask. And that reminds me of, like, you hear about like NFL football here in North America, where
Mhm.
the coaches are sleeping at the stadium all week kind of thing, prepping for the game.
All
That's
right.
what the director, that's what that director is kind of like, schedule when they're got to
Yeah,
do both. That that's
yeah,
that's crazy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. It was funny 'cause he's very, very nice man. And like 3 weeks in, he started being very, irritable.
Right.
And I was like, and I didn't realize, I was like, why is he? And then one day I wanted to go visit the land set because I wanted to meet the other actors. I was like, hey, I want to meet these actors that I have these conversations with in theory, even though
Right.
I was getting like the director would just with a radio say
Yeah.
anybody that wasn't on shooting with me the director would just say their lines and he would
Hmm.
act them. It's actually
Right.
pretty good. He would act them in different voices.
Nice. Nice.
Uh, but I still wanted to meet the other people. And I went to the other set and I was totally surprised because we had just had like, you know, crazy long day. And so I'd asked the assistant, like, hey, can we go to set? I'd like to meet, so it's like the other, and he was there. And he was there. I was like, why are you here? He's like, no, I'm the director. I was like, yeah. I mean, I'd figured, like in the US or in
Yeah.
Europe, you have like several directors. You're the
Yes.
creator, showrunner of the show,
Hmm.
maybe direct the first few episodes or the last one maybe,
Absolutely.
and then occasionally direct if somebody gets sick, especially they were still had some COVID stuff at the time.
Got it.
Because in Asia it was like a year longer of COVID,
Hmm.
and yeah, and then I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. He's not sleeping, but when you're not sleeping, you become,
A little bit cranky.
very, very cranky, and he had had a newborn. Yeah, anyway.
Oh,
I was like, you really have.
oh, man, that's ooh, okay. That's a lot.
The man lost like 30 pounds over the course of the shoot, and he was not a
Uh,
bad guy. Like at the end of the shoot, he was like,
he could have started Oppenheimer, right?
yeah, yeah, totally. Um,
Oh man. So we're gonna wrap it up a bit. Loving the convo, but what
yeah,
was it like living in South Korea?
South Korea is cool. It's totally different. It's like, especially the language and and the food,
Mm,
I wanted to try everything. And
right.
I feel like I had an amazing experience because I was open to trying and learning and
Got it.
stuff. I think it's kind of maybe my life philosophy. If I go someplace I haven't been, like to try not to have any sort of, you know, preconceived notions, say yes to anything anybody offers you. Oh, do you want to go to this place? Yes. It might not necessarily be something I at first find interesting, but just trying something new, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. I'd love to go back. So yeah, maybe it's why I'm learning Korean.
Hey, absolutely.
I could do a drama now as an expat. That would be cool. Or if they did like Cold War stuff, as
Yeah,
spy.
for sure. For sure.
Um,
No, that would be cool. That'd be cool. So, what can fans, for anyone who hasn't caught the show yet, it's on Netflix.
yes,
I think there's 16 episodes, if I'm not
yes.
mistaken.
It's a limited series. They're all out because they were doing like a 2 a week release for a while, but right now they're all out and available. So
Excellent.
it's
And
bingeable,
it
which is
is
what I was
absolutely
missing
bingeable.
when they were first coming out. I was like, I didn't realize I was addicted to the binge. Uh,
Right. It's you do miss it, right? As
yeah,
opposed to oh next Friday or oh next Thursday kind of thing. I totally get it. And
yeah.
what can fans and viewers expect from you coming up? Do you have anything on the docket, or is you just chill time now that you
Yes.
can talk about without
No, I mean the only thing I can say is I'm doing like it's like a crime type drama. It's
nice,
this
nice,
Spanish one
cool,
on for Amazon.
sweet.
And yeah, that's the only thing 100% that I'm doing. Everything else, like yeah, I might have this movie, but it hasn't started shooting, until it's very actors are superstitious. It's like tennis players,
I totally get it.
until I'm there, until I'm shooting,
Yeah,
I'm not really gonna say because
excellent. So
um
we'll be looking forward to your action spy thriller whatever you got coming down.
yeah,
And it's been a pleasure talking to you.
likewise.
This is a great time. Hopefully, we get a chance to chat again. And best of luck with the series and what you got coming up next.
For sure, for sure. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. I had a
All
great time
right,
coming and talking to you about the show and this experience, which has been amazing. So,
all right,
you.
all right. Thanks.
Thanks.